you make of the level of anger among the Indian public about the latest policy regarding the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes?
Well, the level of anger will be very high if this kind of a situation continues for about a week more, and it's going to be extremely high if it continues for 2 weeks more. The reason why the Prime Minister did this was that he has long had his eye on the informal economy. The informal economy is outside the reporting system of government. It doesn't pay taxes. It operates largely on cash. So it's completely uncontrolled by any government mechanism. Now, Prime Minister Modi tried to introduce what's called Jan Dhan accounts, people's accounts, where tens of millions of people were allowed to have bank accounts with zero balance. He's tried to go in for payment schemes of direct payment schemes from government to the person without any in-between. So this process basically is to ensure the, if I may say so, the collapse of the informal economy and making the entire economy formal. The problem in India is at least 20 to 40% of the economy is the informal economy, and whether you can change that in a short period of time is a very, very difficult question.
It is a difficult question. The way to answer a question is not only look at the realities, but also in history, what has been tried, what has failed, what has succeeded. If we remember right, there were so-called fight against the black money in history, 2 previous similar attempts in the nation's history. 1946, for example. 1 and 5 and 10,000 rupee notes were taken out of circulation, a punitive gesture towards black marketing. Then, in the year 1978, then government deemed the 3 notes illegal for the second time to crack down on counterfeits and black money. But both moves, some suggest, turn out to be a total failure. So, question to you, Professor Nalapat. It hasn't succeeded earlier twice, both of them. Then why should we believe it's going to succeed this time? And what's really behind Mr. Modi's administration's decision?
Well, he's packaged this as an anti-corruption measure, but you're right. And the difficulty is about 70% of bribes and 70% of illegal money comes outside the cash system. For example, exports. Supposing you undervalue exports and collect the money there in cash in some Swiss account, or overvaluation of imports. You pay more than the imports are worth, and that extra money is credited by the supplier to some Swiss account. So 70% of this kind of money is completely outside the cash economy. Of the balance, about 15% is through the banking system, through various, for example, bogus accounts, multiple accounts. So only a very small portion of bribes is actually paid in the form of cash, and that too mostly to middle and lower level officials. So, but as the second point is, what is being done is not demonetization. It is exchange of one currency for the other. Now, just because the new rupee is colored pink instead of blue, the policeman is not going to stop demanding a bribe. The village officer is not going to stop demanding a bribe. The official is not going to stop demanding a bribe. So there is really no way in which this can stop bribery. That's a much deeper problem than simply a change in the color of currency.
Right. Well, we certainly understand the motivation if it is about cracking down on corruption. But as Professor Nalapat said, 2 points very clearly. One is that it has always been a small proportion that is handled in cash. Secondly, it failed in all previous times when similar practices were being used as policy. Professor Fu, coming with your perspective in the government, in the so-called national governments, what do you make of the real attempt behind this policy? Is this a politician struggling to make a mark about his policy to his voters at this moment, that he rolled this controversial one out?
Well, I have to give credit to Modi. He has been consistent with his campaign slogans. He will go very hard on corruption. And technically, I have to say this is a very smart move. We may refer to past experiences, but we have new conditions now. Past experiences, you do not have
What
banks.
are the new conditions that
Well,
will
the
make
new
you it could be a success?
Overall, the economy is more connected on the internet. And in other words, technically, it makes the new moves more feasible. India, a bulk of the Indian economy has been in cash, and this is very difficult to trace down the corruption. Now, the bureaucrat's salaries tend to be transparent. This is a certain money you should earn. If you deposit all your money electronically, there is a physical trace of where the money comes from. So in a very significant way, that will improve the system to track down the money flows as far as those bureaucrats are concerned. So I think this is a very smart move on the part of Modi to make that. For the massiveness of this movement, there will have inconveniences, but when you compare the potential significance of those with the inconveniences, it's worth the efforts. And after all, India probably is on the verge to turn from a cash transaction economy to a more formal economy. And this is very important for the modern economy. And as I said, now we have the technical facilities to do that.
It's very interesting, your argument. I think 2 points are interesting. I would like to throw it back to Professor Nalapat. First of all, do you agree, Professor Nalapat, with Professor Fu's argument that a sudden change of policy, getting rid of certain currency notes, will be able to upgrade the overall Indian financial system overnight?
Well, I'd just like to point out that if the professor were to come with me to some villages in India, he'll find that many of them are 10, 20 miles away from a bank. And I would like the professor to come walking with me in the hot sun or in the rain 20 miles to a bank to exchange money. There are very good reasons why a lot of Indians transact in cash, and part of the reason is very poor banking infrastructure in the country. Now, for example, we have around 125,000 ATMs that are supposed to be working. Now, the whole problem that we are facing now, there are too few bank branches, there are too few ATMs. And the second problem we are facing is large numbers of small retail establishments handle only cash. Now, we know, unlike in the case of China, where you've got Walmart over, you've got all these big chains over, India, we haven't got that. The small trader, the small businessman is still the mainstay of the supply of food and essentials to the bulk of the population. Now, making these people jump from cash to credit card is, it may be possible, but I don't think it's going to be done in about 10 days or 15 days. And my view is, in 10 to 15 days, if the money supply is not normalized, there's going to be a very serious situation in the countryside and in the poorer areas of towns. The ironic situation is, this is hitting the poor, this is hitting the rural poor especially the most.
Professor Nalapat, another point made by Professor Fu, while he's observing the situation from China, of course, I think we will all love to walk with you 20 miles in India, whether it's in the sun or in the rain, to get to know the real situation. So we also need your expert on that point, which is whether corruption can be curbed with a technical move, which is to remove a certain amount of currency notes. Will that, a technical move, be able to change the fundamental logic behind the bribery situation?
See, Prime Minister Modi is a very experienced administrator, but I think in this matter he has been led by his officials. Now, there are two problems regarding corruption. Corruption is really caused, not the giver of the bribe is less important than the taker of the bribe. It's caused by the government having too much power over too much of the economy. In India, the government is much more powerful on the economy than even the government in China. Although the Chinese government is supposed to be much more bigger and powerful, it's actually the Indian government that has got more rules, more regulations, and more restrictions.
Right.
Now, the more harder the rules, the more the corruption, the more the bribery. So what is needed to be done is lower regulation and lower taxes. We haven't seen lower regulation. We have seen more and more regulation, more and more power going to officials,
I see.
and the officials love it. They'll make tons of money out of this, and we need lower taxes. Now, even people who are not earning, from international standards very much,
All right.
they are paying 55%, if not 60 to 65% of their income, direct and indirect, as taxes. So you need lower taxes, lower regulation, and that is what you need basically to fight corruption.
I see. Professor Nalapat has given a very resourceful answer, certainly a lot of information for all of us to digest here. Professor Fu, same question to you. Can emergency policies be able to change the direction of fundamental issues in the country?
Well, in a way, I still think this is a very smart technical move in the right direction. There will be cases of inconveniences. Of course, I haven't had a chance to walk in the streets, but we still do not see.
But you saw the long line that we played in the background there.
It's just shots, right? So I still do not see the overall picture up and down the country. To me, it's a very technical, smart move. And of course, that move itself won't be enough. As our India counterpart said, to deal with the more fundamental causes of the corruption, power needs to be decoupled with the resources. And the decoupling, and the critical part of decoupling is to have a round of deregulation. When you regulate the economy, the bureaucrats will have more power, and then the next step is to seek rents.
Okay, so the question is, if it is not necessarily going to really benefit the fight against corruption, really benefit the common people, why now? Professor Nalapat, it's always an important question to ask. Of course, the elections is already somewhat boiling in India. Some say this is favoring Mr. Modi's administration, but you also pointed out earlier that in 2 weeks, if things are not calming down, this is certainly going to be a huge blow to his administration and his party.
Well, I think people are being unfair to Mr. Modi when they say that he's looking at some election. I don't think he's looking at election. I think the Prime Minister knows if this move goes badly, it is going to cost him his job. It's going to cost his party the majority in the next parliament. And in fact, his party is going to become extremely unpopular within 6 months if this move goes badly. I think the Prime Minister genuinely believes that India is capable of making the transition to a formal economy in a very quick period of time. He's always said he has immense faith in the Indian people. He has immense faith in the Indian system. So I think he's administering this shock therapy in the belief that India can make a reasonably smooth transition in, as he says, 50 days by the end of December. If it is true, if the transition can be made, but all depends also on liquidity in the system. Now the system frankly has no liquidity, and I can tell you demand is suffering, the economy is suffering. Unless the Central Bank of India meets the task and ensures liquidity latest by December 31, then I think this economy is also going to be in serious trouble besides Mr. Modi and his party.
Final words from you, Professor Fu. Very briefly, we are running out of time. We see Prime Minister Modi coming up with one campaign after another, well branded, well illustrated to the international community, and yet not necessarily making marks. Is this going to be another one of those series, or this is likely to be a very different name for Mr. Modi?
To go very hard against the corruption is a part of his campaign, and he has to do something such that he keep his promises. And again, as I said, this is a very smart and a technical move against that. It is not going to solve everything, but when you do this, coupled with other reforms, deregulation of the economy, let the market play a more active role, and overall, that will improve the situation. And I guess at this moment, because the world economy has moving in a more technical, electronically connected way, and it also is a call for India to take this opportunity to move its cash transaction economy into a more formal economy.